All right. So today, as we continue on with the progressive movement, we're going to talk about a big problem that was in mostly big cities, cities like New York and Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, and it's they were called political machines. Political machines were all about corruption. They're extraordinarily corrupt. They were greedy. All they were about was putting money in their pockets. Graft, which is another word for bribery and manipulation. They were able to get what they wanted, how they wanted, by using and abusing and manipulating people. So here we go. This is information you're going to need to do what we're going to do after this. All right, so first of all, political machines were political parties that controlled virtually all the activities of a city. They could be, there were Republican political machines, there were Democrat political machines. And if they just happened to be the dominant party in that city, they controlled everything that happened in that city. That political party did. Usually they're led by a party boss he's not an elected official. He's somebody that just kind of rose up through the ranks of the political party, and they rule the cities like a dictator. They control everything that happens. They control who gets elected. They control who runs for office. They can control who gets certain jobs in the cities. They ran the city like a dictator. They're not elected official. They're not an elected official. They're just people who acquired power by working within the political party. Most famous of these party bosses was a guy by the name of Boss Tweed. And this cartoon here, this is a party of Boss Tweed. He was in New York City, and he ran the party out of this building called Tammany Hall. So very often when you hear people talk about political corruption or just general corruption in the cities, very often they'll say things like, oh, it's just like a Tammany Hall. It's a little Tammany Hall, referring back to Boss Tweed, who ran New York City with an iron fist. There was nothing that happened in New York City that Boss Tweed didn't know about and Boss Tweed didn't allow. There was absolutely nothing. He controlled the entire city like a dictator. He controlled it all. The party that he was a part of were the Democrats, but he also, even though he was a Democrat, he controlled the Republican Party as well. That's how powerful he was. Extraordinarily corrupt, extraordinarily powerful. And so this is the cartoon here. You can see on the side of the wagon, it's Tammany, right? There's Boss Tweed. He's driving Tammany Hall, which was the headquarters of the Democratic Party. That's Boss Tweed, and he's holding the horsewhip and pulling Tammany Hall that's being driven by Boss Tweed, where our two horses, one says Democrat, one says Republican. He controlled both parties, even though technically he was a Democrat. So the way that these political machines would get power and gain power and maintain power, very often they preyed on immigrants and the poor. Remember, immigrants are just being dumped at the dock, and they don't know anything about anything. And very often these political machines, Boss Tweed in particular, would have agents, would have people working for Tammany Hall down at the dock waiting for the immigrants as they came off the boat. And they would ask them, hey, do you know where to go? Do you have a job? Do you have a place to live? Do you have anything in your pocket? Do you have food? And these immigrants, of course, they didn't have anything. They didn't know anything. So these workers for the political machine would take the immigrants under their arm and say, we're going to find you a place to work. We're going to find you a place to live. We're going to find you food, right? So they would be the good guy. They're taking them in, and we're going to protect you from this society. It would help them find places to live. They'd find them jobs. They'd get them food. When they would have bills to come in, like they didn't pay the gas bill, or they didn't pay their rent, or they didn't pay whatever bill they may have, the the political machine would come in and pay their bills. If they got into any type of legal trouble, if they got arrested or something like that, the political machine would come in and fix things for them so to get them out of trouble. If somebody in the family died, they would pay very often for funerals, and they would arrange for a coffin, and they would be arrange for flowers to be sent. If somebody had a baby, they would arrange for gifts and money to be sent to the family to celebrate the birth of their baby, right? They did all of these things to begin to gain their trust and have these people rely on them and see them as a true friend. Okay. They would turn up at funerals, they'd turn up at weddings, they'd go to birthdays, they'd go to other celebrations, right? They became a part of the family, and they began to be seen as a really, really good, reliable friend. And all of this was in exchange for their votes. When these immigrants came eligible to vote, and very often when they weren't eligible to vote, political machines control all of that. They can get these immigrants into the voting booth. And so they would come to them and they would say, today's voting day. Let's go vote, right? We helped you get this job. We helped you get this apartment. We got you food on your table. Now it's time for you to repay us. Let's go vote. And they would show up at their job or show up at their house or whatever, take them to vote. And then would go into the voting booth very often with these people. They would, quote unquote, help them vote, tell them who they should vote for. So here in this cartoon, you can see there's the tiger, right? And the tiger is killing Lady Liberty, right? You can see Liberty there, and he's killed these people here. And up here in the crowd, you can see Boss Tweed, that's Boss Tweed again, watching all of this go on. Again, every city had their own political machine. Every city had their own party boss. New York City and Boss Tweed just happened to be the most famous, most notorious one, and the most powerful of all of these bosses. Again, there's Boss Tweed. Political machines controlled election, right? They ran the elections. They're the ones who counted the ballots. They're the ones who made sure people got there to vote. They made sure that the right people voted, and they controlled the ballots. And if the ballots didn't say what they wanted them to say, they got the ballots to say what they wanted them to say, right? So they were able to get whatever they wanted done. They were able to get whoever they wanted elected as sheriff, as city councilman, as state legislator, even as national legislators. They controlled all of that. They controlled who got elected. They can also control who got city contracts to build sidewalks, to build roads, to put in gas and water lines, to put up electrical wires, to build the buildings, or who got business licenses to run a bar, or run a restaurant, or run some sort of store. They controlled all of that. And very often, in order to get these contracts to do this work, building sidewalks and roads or water or whatever, or to get a business license, very often it took a bribe, right? They were the one, you had to pay the party boss or the political machine a bribe, okay? They also control who was hired to work for the city, most notably tax collectors. So when people went out to collect taxes from businesses or residents, the party bosses would make sure before those tax monies were deposited into the city account, some of that money went to the party boss and the political machine. And they also controlled who got hired by the police, because if they control the police, they can control where the police go, and more importantly, where the police don't go. Because these party bosses, political machines, also ran houses of prostitution. They ran gambling houses, and they ran other illegal operations throughout the city. And so if they controlled who was on the police force, they can control what those police do. Very often, it was immigrants who would be put into these roles because they needed a job, and many times they didn't know really what they were getting into. So if you watch old movies or cartoons, very often police officers have an Irish accent, a really thick Irish accent. And that's why Irish were very hated. It was tough for them to find a job. So very often these political machines would get the Irish jobs as policemen. And the police force became a traditional Irish occupation because they were given jobs very often by these political machines. And then party bosses and political machines, they would make money through graft, through the bribery. Oh, you want the contract to build the road? Well, sure, but it's going to cost you. You got to pay us money to get that contract. Oh, you want a license to run a restaurant? Yeah, we can give you the license, but you got to pay us money to do that. Okay? So that's how the party bosses made money. And so here you can see, this is another cartoon of Boss Tweed. And there's the ballot. Back then it was a clear glass jar, right? So you could see the ballots inside that jar. You could see who voted, how they voted, right? This is one of the things that's going to come out of the progressive era, is the anonymous or the private ballot, right? Nobody knows how you voted, because you're not going to put it into a glass jar. If you go and vote in person, you put it into a metal box, and very often you have to put it through a machine that will go into the metal box. Back then, it was a glass jar, so the party bosses could see the votes inside that jar. And if they didn't like the way a vote was, they could reach in there and take that vote out. The table that this is sitting on, it says, in counting there is strength. They had all the strengths because they controlled the ballots. They controlled the votes. Okay. And down below, you can see that's what's the matter. And Boss Tweed says, as long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it? Okay. There is nothing you could do about it because he controlled the votes. He controlled how many ballots came in. All right. So now what I want you guys to do, because I couldn't figure out how to embed these videos into the presentation here, go back into Google Classroom, and there are two video clips that I'd like you to watch. One is called Tammany Hall Political Corruption. So that one, this comes from the movie The Gangs of New York, which we've already seen a clip earlier where they were showing the attitude of some people against the Irish immigrants coming in. So this is from that same movie, and it's Tammany Hall Political Corruption. So what's happening? I want you to pay real close attention to what's happening in this clip. There's lots and lots of things happening that are really good depictions of some of the corruption that took place back then. Opening the clip, you'll see Boss Tweed is negotiating with the leader of the Irish in this area known as Hell's Kitchen. And Boss Tweed wants the Irish to vote for his candidates. And the Irishman, who is played by Leonardo DiCaprio, the Irishman is going to say, well, if you want our votes, you've got to give us offices, right? We want to hold some offices. And Boss Tweed says, well, I don't know. I'll give you an alderman, which is like a lesser city councilman. And Leonardo DiCaprio says, no, we want something better than that. We've got aldermans. We've got, Irish guys doing that. We want something better. So the Boss Tweed says, well, there's nothing better than that. I can't give you anything. And Leonardo DiCaprio is going to say, well, what about a sheriff? Sheriff would be a pretty powerful position. And Boss Tweed says, well, you'll never find an Irishman who's worth voting for as a sheriff. So they run, the Irish do find a candidate, and they run him for office. I want you to pay attention to how his opponent, who's running against him for sheriff, how his opponent talks about the Irish and tells people why they shouldn't vote for that particular guy for sheriff. And then they're going to show Election Day. pay really a close attention to what happens on election day, where they get the voters from, what they make the voters do, how they get the voters to vote more than one time. And then at the very end of the clip, Boss Tweed, they're going to show Boss Tweed in Tammany Hall, and one of his advisors comes in and gives him an update on the election. Pay very close attention to that conversation. It's a very interesting, but a very realistic conversation that would have taken place back then. Pay really close attention to that. And then the second video I want you to watch will say Irish Welcome, and it's also in Google Classroom. So Irish Welcome shows the Irish coming off of the boat. They've just arrived. They've just been processed through Ellis Island, and now they're being dumped in the New York City harbor area. And look at how people treat them, what people do to them as they're coming off the boat. They're not happy that all these Irish immigrants are showing up. And then at the very end of the clip, Boss Tweed shows up, and he begins offering the Irish all of these things to help them out in exchange to eventually in exchange to get their allegiance. So watch those two clips, and then watch the video clip where I explain how to do today's assignment that goes with all of this. All right. Good luck. Enjoy. Have a great day.